What survives is rarely what was most necessary to understand. The records that remain often appear solid, catalogued, and preserved, while the events that shape them have already receded beyond recovery. History is commonly imagined as an accumulation of evidence, a gradual expansion of knowledge built from documents, inscriptions, and memory. Yet some of the most persistent historical questions emerge not from what survives, but from what does not. The archive can preserve dates while losing motives. It can preserve names while losing identities. It can preserve outcomes while losing the sequence that produced them. Histories that end in silence remind us that uncertainty is not always a temporary condition awaiting discovery. Sometimes uncertainty survives because the evidence required to remove it has disappeared. In those cases, absence becomes more durable than explanation, and the limits of knowledge become part of the record itself. Certain facts can still be confirmed. Archives preserve fragments from different centuries, regions, and civilizations. Clay tablets remain from ancient Mesopotamia. Administrative records survive from imperial courts. Ship manifests, tax registers, legal decrees, and inscriptions continue to occupy shelves and collections across the world. Archaeological sites provide material traces of settlements, roads, fortifications, and trade networks. In some cases, surviving documents can be dated precisely. In others, only approximate chronology remains. Yet alongside these fragments stand visible gaps. Entire collections vanish through war, fire, neglect, environmental decay, or deliberate destruction. Some archives survive only because copies were made elsewhere. Others are known solely through references in documents that remain. Historians can identify where records should exist and often where they once existed. What they cannot always determine is what those records contained. The erosion rarely appears all at once. A collection may survive for centuries before a portion disappears. A chronicle may remain intact except for several pages removed at an unknown date. A correspondence may preserve responses while losing the original letters that prompted them. At first, these gaps seem manageable. Context appears capable of compensating for absence. Interpretation appears capable of filling space. Yet the longer the record is examined, the more the missing sections begin shaping what can be known. A register preserved in partial form may contain hundreds of entries before ending abruptly in the middle of a line. The final notation remains unfinished. No explanation accompanies the interruption. The record continues nowhere else. The clerk's hand survives. The completion does not. As archives thin, contradictions become harder to evaluate. One surviving account may describe an event in detail. Another surviving fragment may suggest something different. Ordinarily, additional sources might clarify the discrepancy. In some cases, those additional sources are known to have existed. References to them remain embedded in later documents. The documents themselves do not. What survives, therefore, preserves evidence of missing evidence. The contradiction remains suspended because the materials capable of resolving it no longer exist. This pattern repeats across centuries. Entire populations can become visible only through indirect traces left in administrative systems that recorded taxation, military service, or property ownership. The records indicate presence. They rarely preserve voices. Names appear briefly before disappearing from the archive entirely. Histories emerge in fragments, not because they were incomplete when written, but because survival itself selected only portions of what once existed. Another interruption appears in a collection of correspondence preserved across decades. Several letters remain. References indicate others once accompanied them. The sequence breaks. The conversation continues in fragments, but one participant effectively vanishes from the record. The absence does not remain static. It expands as interpretation encounters its limits. Historians frequently work through comparison, connecting documents to reconstruct context. Yet reconstruction depends upon surviving material. When the surviving material becomes sparse enough, confidence begins to narrow. Certain statements remain possible. Others become increasingly difficult to support. The result is not necessarily mystery in the dramatic sense. More often, it resembles gradual reduction. The archive becomes thinner than the questions directed toward it. In some cases, material evidence survives, while textual evidence disappears. Structures remain standing long after records explaining their purpose have vanished. Artifacts endure, while descriptions are lost. Archaeology can establish presence, chronology, and physical conditions. It cannot always restore meaning. The object survives. The explanation does not. Even when interpretations appear persuasive, they often rest upon limited foundations. Additional evidence could strengthen them. Additional evidence could overturn them. The evidence never arrives. This creates a peculiar condition in historical knowledge. The more closely one approaches certain subjects, the more visible the edges become. Large narratives may suggest continuity. Detailed examination often reveals interruption. What appears coherent at distance fragments upon inspection. The surviving archive provides enough information to suggest a shape, but not always enough to confirm it. A witness appears briefly in a legal proceeding preserved through copies. The testimony ends before a conclusion is recorded. Subsequent references mention the case, but not the witness. The record continues. The witness does not. Over time, absence acquires its own permanence. New discoveries occasionally recover fragments once thought lost. Entire archives have emerged unexpectedly from buried deposits, sealed rooms, abandoned settlements, and neglected collections. Yet these recoveries do not eliminate uncertainty as often as they relocate it. New material answers certain questions while exposing others. The overall landscape remains incomplete. The silence shifts position without disappearing. This is particularly evident when histories terminate at moments where continuation would matter most. Administrative records cease. Correspondence stops. Chronicles end. Archaeological layers reveal change without explaining it. Historians can often identify where the narrative breaks. Determining why it breaks is another matter entirely. The disappearance of evidence becomes inseparable from the disappearance of certainty. A manuscript survives almost intact except for its final pages. The text reaches the threshold of explanation. Then it ends. The missing conclusion leaves no trace beyond the fact that it is missing. Eventually, the absence itself becomes impossible to ignore. The central question no longer concerns what happened within the surviving record. It concerns what cannot be recovered beyond it. At what point does a historical question cease being unanswered and become unanswerable? The archive offers no precise boundary. The surviving fragments indicate possibilities but refuse confirmation. The missing documents may once have contained the necessary evidence. They may not have. The record preserves no method for determining which is true. That uncertainty remains. Not because investigation failed, not because interpretation lacked effort. It remains because the materials required to move beyond uncertainty are themselves absent. The limit exists within the evidence, rather than within the inquiry. The archive reaches its edge and stops. Beyond that edge, the questions continue without acquiring answers. The silence therefore persists not as a temporary obstacle, but as part of the historical landscape. The surviving fragments remain valuable. The dates remain, the locations remain, the material traces remain, yet none of them fully restore what disappeared. The absence remains present in every attempt to reconstruct what no longer survives. Explanation approaches the gap repeatedly and finds the same boundary waiting. What survives is not always enough to explain what happened. If this exploration stayed with you, you'll find more on timeless questions. At what point does uncertainty become part of the evidence itself?